Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? Boy, we've been having some big audiences. This is great. So this is our Thursday conference. Most of you are regular attendees, and we use the microphone mainly because we stream this. We not only stream it but also record it. Which is why when you ask a question, which we encourage you to do, we ask that you hold down the button on the microphone, not so much that the people in the room can hear it, but so that people who are listening in, and there are people who are listening in, and for those of you out there, many of you probably know if you want to ask a question, you just tweet with hashtag DMICEConf, DMICECONF, and usually someone monitors the Twitter feed. And I can actually attest that this system works well. A week ago today, it was actually Friday morning where I was in Singapore. I listened to Tim's talk, at least until the microphone battery went out. And then I disconnected because I thought that was a problem and I couldn't reconnect. But I got to hear most of his talk, and I was actually going to tweet a question, but I didn't get a chance to. Before I introduce Aaron, I just want one other thing, especially since a lot of you are here. I just want to give you a save the date. I think I've mentioned this before, but on March 17th, many of you know Kevin Johnson, Dr. Kevin Johnson, who's the chair of informatics at Vanderbilt, who's actually produced a documentary movie on health information exchange, and will be coming to visit OHSU. We'll probably do one of these noon talks, although we'll probably have it in a bigger room. And then in the evening, we'll actually show this movie, and then we're actually going to invite some people from around Oregon to kind of talk about health information exchange efforts going on. So will hopefully be an interesting day, and I hope we can get a good turnout to show Kevin how enthusiastic our students are for when the chair from Vanderbilt comes. And of course, Vanderbilt, another domino has fallen in the EPIC universe, has chosen to replace its homegrown system with EPIC. But we're here to hear Aaron today, so I don't want to take away from his time. I will briefly introduce Aaron, since most of you know him, and I don't need a paper this time because I know his history so well. Aaron did his undergraduate work at the University of Michigan in electrical engineering, went to medical school in Boston, decided that he didn't want to follow the patient care path, and ended up in the software industry, initially in Boston, and then landed at Intel. And then about 12 years ago, decided he kind of wanted to gravitate back towards medicine. And he knew a mutual friend of ours, and he came to my office, and I talked him into doing the NLM fellowship, which he did really well. And then I talked him into joining our faculty, which he's done really well. And he's had a lot of success in the traditional academic sense in terms of publications, grants, and contributions to science and teaching. But really in the last few years has focused on what we call the Informatics Discovery Lab, and which I think is a very important initiative in the department in terms of looking beyond our kind of traditional things we do academically, like write papers and teach students, which is very important, but also kind of reaching out and disseminating informatics, not only knowledge, but actual activity. And so the IDL has been the main conduit for that. So Aaron periodically gives a talk on kind of an update on the IDL. There's opportunities for faculty and students and others to work on projects. So I will turn it over to Aaron.
Thanks, Bill. You could give this talk. That was my talk in a nutshell right there. So why are we here again? Well, thank you all for coming, by the way. Some people say you're all here for the pizza, but maybe you're here for the pizza and to hear about the IDL, which is great. Some of you have heard parts of this talk last year because I did a State of the IDL last year, and so there'll be some new stuff for you, for people who are new and haven't heard this before. There'll be some background and review. So many of you are probably asking some of these questions. The new people are, what's the IDL and why do we have an IDL? And I'll answer some of that. What has the IDL been doing lately? Now, for people that already know the first two, this will be an update so you know what's going on. And lastly, how can I get involved with the IDL, which is kind of an ongoing question for everybody. So what's the IDL? As Bill said, it's an initiative of the department. It's not separate from the department. It's not an institute. It's not a different thing. It's an initiative. An initiative is really you know, kind of a label to give us a structure and a team to focus on something. And what we wanted to focus on is really informatics collaborations and sort of what we would call non-traditional collaborations. What I mean by non-traditional is collaborations with people that academic informaticians traditionally didn't collaborate with. So what's non-traditional is our outlook, not the people we're collaborating with. The non-traditional would mean other clinical departments, commercial institutions, you know, could be government, any of that kind of thing. Different than, for example, collaborating on a grant where you've got co-investigators from a number of different institutions. DMICE, you know, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? But DMICE already did that well. They didn't need a special initiative to focus on this. So we're outwardly oriented. The agenda is to get academic informatics into the real world. We don't want to just stop at publishing articles. We have this really good idea. You know, informatics and DMICE in particular is very good at doing evaluation. You know, we get this good idea. We implement the alpha version of it. We do an evaluation. We publish a paper, and then we go on to the next thing. So we don't want to do that. We want to actually deploy that in the real world. Now, publishing is also a very good thing to do, and I'll come back to this point a few times. We also have to publish all this stuff. In fact, the ideal is to get some synergy between the real world applications and the publishing. You know, in academia and to some extent in the real world as well, you know, publishing and giving talks like this, that's how you actually get recognition and credit and acknowledgement for the stuff that you did. I think that, you know, I often tell my students that if you don't publish, it's like you never did it. And I think that's true in academia. It's not necessarily so much true in operations. There's still a lot of value in doing something, even if you don't publish it in operations. We can impact healthcare. We can impact the quality of life of patients in that way. But even so much better to publish it, get it out there, get other people to see and build off of your ideas, right? So even more value that way. So who's the IDL? Well, Deb and I are, quote unquote, the leaders. You know, I'm the director of the IDL. Deb is the program manager. We have guidance from a lot of faculty at the university. I won't read all the list of IDL advisors. This has gone through kind of some transitions over the last couple of years. We officially have an advisory board, but over the last year it's been sort of difficult to, I think, take best advantage of that. Our individual projects in the IDL have leadership and advisory boards and guidance. And I'll talk about specific projects with the two nights, the night cancer and the night cardiovascular, and we have advisory boards for those. But the overall idea, we have more like advisors and working out how best to use those effectively is something I think that we're going to be doing in some of the strategic planning that we're doing for next year as ongoing. Other faculty, staff, and students, lots of people are working on IDL projects and have been involved in some way. I won't read the whole names, but lots of people either are, you know, substantial time, full-time, part-time, accessory time on IDL projects. And so it's really a large group of people. I think I said this last year, you know, there's a picture of the little department web page snapshots. Really, you know, because it's an initiative in the department, everybody's welcome, right? It's not like a fixed thing where there's a boundary, a hard boundary around the IDL and you're either in or out. People will move in and out based on what projects they're working on, based on what they're interested in, what the needs are, and what their skills are, et cetera, et cetera. So everyone is welcome to participate as there's a good fit and it aligns with those objectives that we talked about on the prior slide. So why do we have an IDL? Well, originally, you know, and I don't have the slide in here anymore, I talked about a lot of collaboration with industry and how academia and industry can work together. And I think that's still true. There are some challenges to that we found that I'll talk about briefly. But even more true is that there's a great lead for informatics just within the healthcare system, even just within OHSU, and let's say OHSU and their partners as OHSU becomes kind of a health system with taking on risk and managing risk and insurance system and everything else as it's growing. I mean, guys have heard about the deals and arrangements with MODA and with Salem Health and all these things that have happened during the last year. That just ups the need, I think, for deep informatics in the healthcare system. So there's really a great need for this, a great opportunity, and to really realize the value to health and improving the quality, value, and health of our population. I think informatics in general and the better and more active use of information is an essential thing in that. So there's just, I still got the explosion slide, but it's a different explosion. This is the explosion of the need to use informatics and data wisely in the improvement of our health system. So what's needed? I've listed a number of different things here, but I'm gonna actually go in a different order. So, the bulleted list, don't imply any kind of ranking. The number one thing really is delivering value to the customer. So who's the customer, right? I mean, one thing that I found is, contrasting, say, my Intel engineering experience with my academic experience is that, academic value has a set of things that are important and a priority of those things, and healthcare delivery systems have a different set of value and priority of those things. And if you're doing work in the real world, you really have to deliver that value to the customer. Now that said, I think that there's a lot of overlap between the lists of those two groups, and there's a lot of potential for synergy, but I think the priorities in the order are somewhat different, and you need to be sensitive to that thing in order to succeed. And there's lots of little details with that. Differing timing and timelines when people need things, different kinds of arrangements and contracts that don't look anything like grant proposals, and we've had to be creative with the university and the department management to figure out how to do some of these things. Different kinds of project management and reporting, probably, much more like agile project management and or more formal commercial project management than sometimes grant project management. Intellectual property concerns, if you're working with companies, these can be really complicated, time-consuming issues. A number of faculty who are working on some of these things would probably be nodding their head around this. And not so much when we're talking about dealing with internal health system customers, which is good because it takes out that whole kind of complexity there. So, all of these things wrap around this idea of what's of value to the customer and how you figure that out. Who is the customer? What are their goals? How can we achieve those things? That whole process. It's not just about intellectual curiosity and scholarship. Some of it's about that, but that's not the top thing. So how do we develop competencies in that? And that's one of the things that the IDL has been working on, and I think gaining improved skills at doing. And this comes down from smaller to big things, big things like being aware of the intellectual property issues and how to work with tech transfer and what's going to be a huge time sink and what's going to work well and how to sign licensing agreements and do that in an effective manner with the different companies that we have collaborations and whatnot. And to relatively simple things like change management tracking for projects and things like that, and having a place to store the accumulated knowledge and experience of what the project is, so it's searchable and all that. We're informaticians, so we should use informatics tools for our own information as well, right? Anybody who's been here last year has seen this slide, right? What are the aims of the IDL? And the nice thing about this, and maybe one of the big reasons why I kept this slide in here, is because I think all these things are true, and it hasn't really changed. right? The aims are to make the most of the opportunities, establish long-term partnerships, deploy rigorous informatics into the wild, enhance the scope of the education and training in our program, lead a collaborative entrepreneurial culture, diversify funding sources. I should also say in here, provide informatics leadership to the university and the community. That hasn't changed, so that's been nice that, you know, after, I don't know, what is it, Deb? It's like 3 years of the IDL now. This is still lines up with really what we see our aims are. So, this is the new part. What have we been doing over the last year? Well, lots of stuff. Within OHSU, we've got the Cardiovascular Institute partnership that I'll talk about. We've done a couple of partnerships with the Knight Cancer Institute, including a text mining bake-off and a more text mining-oriented service corps, the beginnings of a service corps development. And these things with the asterisks, I have slides on and I'll talk more about. The data science initiative, have you probably heard there's a big data science initiative going on at the university to plan, you know, what does it mean to do data science at OHSU? What's our strategy really at an institutional level? And we've had a lot of input and been part of that process, which is still ongoing. Beyond OHSU, we've continued and enhanced and are looking to expand our EPIC partnership in a number of directions. We have a new IMO partnership that I'll talk about really briefly. Again, gets into those licensing issues. And teams from OHSU led by the quote-unquote, or sponsored by the IDL and led in part by Deb Woodcock, who's the program manager, has won two sequential, thank you, AMIA design challenges, which is pretty cool, I think. So let's talk about the Knight Cardiovascular Institute partnership. This really has to do with enhancing the quality of care and informing workflow redesign with analytics, right? How does the Knight Cardiovascular Institute become a top 10 cardiovascular center in the country, in the world? How do we do that? And one approach and one essential ingredient in this approach is using data, right? We need to know how we're doing, and we also need to know if changes we put in place make things any better or not. And if they don't, we need to come up with different ideas to make things better and then see if those actually are reflected in the data. So, you know, this is process improvement and data-driven decision-making coming to medicine, finally. And this is doing it in the real world. So what we've been doing is creating a monitoring system that allows you to do this. And we started with sort of an initial project centered on, and I think I'm jumping ahead of a slide, sitting on heart failure and the American College of Cardiology measures that are relating to heart failure as an initial set. These all go through a whole pipeline and are computed on a regular basis, and then they're visualized with Tableau. Tableau is a tool for visualizing data, and you can produce interactive graphics and things like that where you can drill down and explore. And you can also just produce nice-looking reports that turn into a PDF that can be mailed to the users on a regular basis and archived and referred back to and all that kind of thing. Very much a team-driven, agile process. We're iterating and improving and refining as we go. There's a huge partnership component to this, which is that you know, there's sort of the informatics technical aspect, and there's the workflow, clinical knowledge, best practices. What do we really do at OHSU? What data do we capture? How do we use EPIC? And how do we fit all that together to produce a meaningful system with meaningful results? And that collaboration and that interactivity is really essential. You know, I often say that, you know, it's easy to write some SQL and produce some numbers, but without any context and without any understanding of the limitations and environmental aspect of those numbers, they probably don't mean anything, and likely nobody's going to believe them anyway. So that gets into validation, right? One of the things I think that we as a department are very good at, and we brought into the IDL, is this idea of validating things, right? We don't just produce numbers. We don't just build systems and run them out, but we actually do significant amount of validation. This is a slide I think Nicole made, but it still documents sort of our process for creating measures. And a very important part about this is the actual manual validation. You know, much like, and this is where we can bring in some of the academic rigor, right? Much like a research study, we actually sample the data from the measures and evaluate manually by doing a pretty thorough chart review how accurate the measures are. It turns out that what you can do with an automated system is limited by the data that's in the system, whether that's structured or unstructured data. And you have to make interpretations of what gets done and what that data means and how it applies to the different measures. And by doing validation, you can tell what the limitations of that approach are and if they have some significant impact on the measures that you're calculating or not. We had this discussion yesterday in our team meeting. If the approximations you're making are sort of randomly and evenly distributed, they often look like they're not making a big difference in the measures, and the measures you're calculating, the numbers are still accurate as compared to the manual review. If they're biased in some way, then that's going to be a problem, and you're going to have to deal with that. But the way you're going to determine that and the way they're going to detect that, again, is with the manual review. Go ahead. Push the button.
To work, and from an informatics perspective, it seems sort of self-evident that we would always do this in healthcare, and yet, having been on meaningful use implementation projects and now actually looking at the end of meaningful use announced this week, much of what we've done in healthcare around operational informatics does not take this type of rigorous approach. We've implemented EHRs, we pull data out, we report the data without a validation step, and so it's great that we're now looking in the next decade of operational informatics to start doing this.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's the validation again it's necessary, but not not sufficient all by itself. But it's totally necessary because without doing that, you don't really know what the numbers mean. The numbers may be the reflection of what you intended to measure. They might be measuring something different, like half the providers are using this tool to calculate the numbers and fill it out, and the other half aren't. So what it really tells you in that case is not necessarily that the patients are not receiving appropriate care, but it's telling you that you've got inconsistency in your workflow and your practice, and you might want to look at shoring up that consistency so no matter who they see in your group, they get treated and documented in the same way. That's a workflow and a care management and a practice decision, but without the insight of the data and the validation, you're just working in the dark. Validation is actually a complex business. And we've developed some graphics and visualization to try to dive into this. And this is some work actually that Nicole, who is coming back from maternity leave soon, yay, developed. And I wanted to show this to you just to give you a flavor of this. And this is where I think some of the academic operational aspects of this really show themselves, because this is something we needed to develop to get our heads around the data. But I also think that it's something we need to write up and publish and present. So what this is so when you're doing these measures, right, like 3 sentences on clinical quality measures. When you're doing these measures, you're usually computing a ratio, and there's a numerator and a denominator. And let's say it's a patient-level measure, so there's some number of patients in the denominator, and there's some number of patients in the numerator, and the ratio is, quote-unquote, how good you're doing. And the measures, if they're ACC measures, are defined by an official body, although measures, I want to say as an aside, could be defined by ourselves and the practice based on what our goals are and what we think is an appropriate way to measure what our goals are. They don't have to be, designed by some committee somewhere else. But for the purposes of the heart failure measures, and certainly this one, which happens to be the ACC measure 1 left ventricular ejection fraction measurement, they're predefined. You have to interpret them. They're defined like text. You read them and interpret them and apply them to your data, and you've got essentially something that defines a set operation for numerators and a set operation for denominators, and then the ratio of the numbers in those sets gives you your quality measure, and you want to keep computing this on a regular basis. And you know, so you have this over time, and you can graph it over time, and you can look at trends and all that kind of stuff. But when you do the validation, you've got lots of sources of variation and error, right? Because you've got an automated system which is counting up the numerator patients. You've got an automated system which is counting up the denominator patients. And you've got the automated system calculating the ratio and all that. Well, when you do the validation, you've got to validate the numerator, you've got to validate the denominator, and you've got to validate the measure, right? So there's all those n-way comparisons. And that's what this slide actually shows. If you look at the, just looking at the top row, and I think FISA probably does a much better job of explaining this than I do, so correct me if I get anything wrong. If you look at the top row, well, let me give you a little background. The numerator numbers are in red, and the size of the circle sort of reflects the size of the number. Sorry, the denominator is red. I meant the denominator. The denominator is red, it says right there, and the size is the size of the circle, and the numerator is orange, and again it's the size of the circle, and then the overlap shows the intersection. And so, for example, for this heart failure measure, there's a certain red amount, and on this side is the automated measure, and then on this side is the manual validation. And what you'll see is that the denominator match, this shows the relative denominator match between the automated system and the manual chart review. Very, very high overlap. These circles, there's just a little difference here. So we're getting all the right patients in the numerator, in the denominator. Check me on this. The numerator, on the other hand, there's some difference. Right? There's some difference between what we're getting in the automated system, which is the inner circle, and what the manual chart review shows in the outer circle. And that leads to this difference in the performance estimate, which is the overlap of those circles. The automated system's on the left, and the manual chart review is on the right. And then the intersection basically shows the difference in the actual ratio in the quality measure. So, you know, this is the amount of the automated system, the ratio of the automated system, and this is the measure of the manual chart review. And what this shows is we're doing a good job of the denominator, but we're missing patients on the numerator, right? These patients in this strip are patients that have been appropriately cared for, but we're missing them in the automated system. And what this basically winds up with is a limitation in our data collection where the recording of the measuring of the LVEF either happened outside OHSU, so it doesn't exist in any structured field in EPIC. It might be in a PDF of an outside report or something, or it might be in a patient note. You know, the issue, then the opportunity is, well, is that important, and what do you want to do about it? Do we want to enter that in a structured field when it comes from an outside place? Do we want to change something else in our workflow? And then you can have the conversation about, well, whose responsibility is to do that? When does it get done? All that kind of stuff. Do you want to make a comment? Okay. Okay, you look like you wanted to say something. So Greg is actually our sponsor and project lead or customer lead from KCVI. So thanks for coming. So there's and you know, we've got one of these for every one of the measures, and every one of them has different insight that you can glean from looking at the picture. I don't have it here right now, but there are some measures where there's some variation in terms of the numerators and the denominators where they don't overlap exactly completely, but when you actually do the intersection, the overall calculation is very close to what the manual chart review is because they kind of cancel out because they're randomly distributed. So that's all nice, and that's good informatics and validation, so we believe the numbers, and we can, show the customers that validation so that they believe us and realize that, that the system's working as intended and we understand what it does. But in the end, we produce a report, and this is just a screenshot of the first page of the report that basically shows each of the measures organized by the overall KCVI Institute as well as the individual specialty groups that they wanted to break it out. And there's lots of different ways to slice and dice the data. This is just one way that we decided would be generally useful. And I was just bringing out two different lines that are sort of zoomed out from the report, HCC measures 6 and 7, which are basically ACE and beta blocker therapy for patients that have congestive heart failure. This is the N, the number of patients in the denominator, and this is the actual quality measure and where they are, all with the automated system, all running on a regular basis, generating the report every week. Right now, we're not just automatically generating the report and sending it out. It's actually being looked at by somebody before, just to make sure that there's nothing wrong with it. But it's largely automated. Okay. So any questions about night cardiovascular I can answer at the end. Hopefully, I'll leave some time for questions. We also have a partnership with the Night Cancer Institute. This started over a year and a half ago. The Night Cancer Institute hired Judy Barkal, who is IT strategist for the night, and we've been having conversations over the years about, where the IT strategy is going and Judy's ideas. And she came up with this idea for a translational research hub, and I'm not going to get into a lot of detail about this, but the idea is to have an easy place for the night cancer investigators to go to get integrated data to do their research. Simple idea, right? Not so easy to execute, but simple idea. Part of that is, and I really should have like one of her diagrams or something in here. Part of that is the idea that a lot of information is locked up in the text, in the pathology reports and clinical notes and things like that, and that automated text processing of those reports should be a feed into the translational research hub, right? So to do that, we need to have some sort of, not just academic capability, but core facility for doing that automated text extraction. So Judy comes from industry. Most recently, I think, was at IBM at, I don't remember exactly what level. Do you know? Pretty high level management. And we looked at what it would take versus buy versus build, and decided that that it was going to be a lot of work just to build up this capability. We're going to buy a technology that we were going to build this capability on top of. There are many vendors in this space, believe it or not, and the IDL helped and organize and run essentially a vendor bake-off using anonymized OHSU data and giving it to these different vendors with a week and saying, here's the kind of stuff we're interested in, here's the medical concepts, extract out the best that you can and give it back to us in a week. And we didn't want to give them more than a week because we didn't want to give them an inordinate amount of time. We didn't want to give them time where they thought that they could manually edit the results or anything like that. It was enough work that they could do some system building and then apply their system in a week and then send us back the results. Then we did the manual review and assessed the different vendors, and it turned out that one vendor was much, much better than everyone else. Basically, one vendor was prepared and the other vendors were not so prepared. And that was Informatics, which is an English company that also has offices in the U.S., and they have a product called I2E, which is basically, and Stephen Wu, who's in the audience, can comment on this, sort of a commercialized embodiment of your best and standard sort of practices for pattern matching in automated text processing. But it's a commercially supported project, right? So that means that you get upgrades, and they maintain it, and they add terminologies to it, and all that kind of good stuff. So that's how we got to where we are now. What we're doing now is building up a core capability for text extraction using that Linguamatics system. There are a number of pilot projects that we're doing to demonstrate the value and also learn how best to use the system. Several different clinical trials where we'll be extracting out potential patients that meet the basic criteria for the clinical trials, and then using that in to inform the trial recruiters to contact patients if they so choose. This actually has some nice dovetails in with what Tim talked about last week, sending out automated MyChart emails and things like that, offering patients the opportunity to participate in a clinical trial, which I think is probably a good next step. BioLibrary, OHSU has a BioLibrary with a sample of, with a library of biological samples that have been annotated by a lot of different genomic and other tests. It will increase value to that BioLibrary to have those samples annotated with things from the EHR. And so there's a pilot project going on to actually extract those things from path reports and notes in order to improve the annotation. Right now they do the annotation, but they're doing it manually by going through the chart and clicking drop downs and all that kind of stuff. It's expensive and time consuming. And we're looking at larger projects where we're, contributing to the phenotype side of supporting genome phenotype analysis as well. The EPIC relationship, so that's the OHSU partnerships, and I'm going to talk about some of the external partnerships. The EPIC relationship continues. As you know, we're the first program to have, an official EPIC approval to use their system, their EHR for informatics, education and research. We have 2 of these instances up and running. The education instance has been used for teaching the 513 class, hands-on EPIC lab, hands-on EHR lab with EPIC quite a bit. We've had several regular check-ins with EPIC, and they're pretty happy with us as a partner around relationship and how, and look to us, I think, on providing some kind of advice on how to interact with academic informatics, and that's been positive. We also have broad agreement to use it as a research instance for investigations, and we're looking to expand this into some additional areas. One thing that I know a number of people here are very excited about is FHIR, F-H-I-R, that we've talked about before, and having a version of EPIC that has FHIR capabilities so that we can do some development and prototyping on it. Again, this would be very limited, no real patient data, constrained access and whatnot, but just having the capabilities so that you can do the prototyping, I think, would put us in good stead to do some innovation. Something definitely new is the IMO collaboration. We actually, and this is where, a lot of the licensing talk and IP and stuff comes in. We have an agreement with Intelligent Medical Objects, which is a company that builds terminology servers, mapping strings to different terminologies, ontologies, vocabularies, all that kind of stuff. And we have a license agreement to basically get a free version of their system for student projects and research and teaching, etc. We've got the agreement in place. It took quite a while to get in place for the reasons that all these things always take quite a while. It's longer than you would expect. And we should be bringing this online over the next year. We don't actually have the system up in place yet. IMO has agreed to provide some training on this, so look for training or session, maybe one of these IDL talks to pop up on the calendar where, okay, this is how you would use this terminology server in your projects, and IMO agreed to provide that once we get the system in place. Am I doing on time? Okay. So, challenges. I mentioned some challenges. Not just IMO, but lots of things take longer in the preparation than you would expect. Very few things go fast in terms of making arrangements. There's investment in time and effort in things, and you have to sort of figure out what the expected value is going to be, because it'd be easy to spin your wheels on a lot of things that don't actually get realized. I think we were talking to IMO for a better part of 2 years to get that agreement in place to get the system, from the beginning of when we talked about it to, you know, to now when we have a license agreement signed by both parties. Not all opportunities can be realized, and that's fine. That's sort of just part of business in the real world, just like not all grant proposals get funded, but you don't want to write a whole bunch of grant proposals that you know are not going to get funded because it's a waste of time. You don't want to be involved in a lot of business negotiations and relationship building if it's not going to go anywhere. That said, you have to make the investment because you don't know for sure, right? We did a couple of things that took a significant amount of time that didn't immediately realize a project or something that we wanted to do. We were part of the IBM EPIC Department of Defense proposal. Well, as you know, IBM EPIC wasn't selected. Nobody's fault. It's just the way it goes. We had developed quite a detailed proposal to work with a startup company, and I'm not going to get into the details of what we were going to do, but it had something to do with my research background in machine learning and predictive modeling and text mining and that kind of stuff. It turned out that there are some significant restrictions in what OHSU can do legally in terms of intellectual property arrangements. Turns out, and I didn't know this until we got into it, it turns out that OHSU, being a state institution, cannot sell or give away the intellectual property ownership. You can license stuff in perpetuity, you can license stuff for free, whatever, but you can't actually give away ownership. And if what you're developing has high enough value or high enough exposure risk to the company that you're working with, they may want to own it. And so after scoping out the work and spending quite a bit of time defining what it would be and how we would do it and stuff like that, their lawyers and our lawyers came to an impasse and say, we can't do this because you need to own it and we can't give it to you. So things happen, you learn, right? But it takes time and investment to learn these things. So you don't want to have too many experiences that result in, you know, finding out that it's not going to play at the last minute after you've been all the way down. Last thing, you know, sometimes it's been difficult to get faculty and students to use the IDL research system. We've tried to schedule some trainings and things like that. We haven't had as much buy-in and participation for students as we were hoping for and we would like. I mean, maybe it's that we need to dangle some newfangled sexy technology like fire in front of them and they'll jump on the bandwagon. But, I mean, that said, you know, these systems are, you know, they're shared. They take time and investment, and you know we have to administrate access to these systems as people need them. We can't just leave them open for any student to log in and play around with and do whatever, because you may break the system and bring down somebody else's project. So we need to have some kind of review and approval process to giving people access, just to keep it a quality resource for everybody. So that implies some minimal level of training on the system so that you can have access for your projects. But we definitely want people to come to us with ideas of projects that can run on this, and we would be delighted to support you in doing research projects on these systems. So key learnings, I'm going to go through this fast because I want to give people time to ask questions. Partnerships are built on relationships. These take time. You want to invest that time in for the long term. And I think that's really borne out with our relationships with all of our partners now. I mean, all of our ongoing partnerships are becoming long-term partnerships. Prioritization and balance are essential. You can't do everything. And how do you develop new opportunities at the same time that you're actually working on the ones that you've already committed to? Bringing in commercial funding is difficult. Getting people to sign a check and send it to you, that is difficult. Oddly enough, getting value in kind, getting licensing for systems so that you can use them, that's not nearly as difficult. So we need to look at different ways, and I have this on the next slide, about how to collaborate with commercial entities. I think the original 3 years ago IDL idea that they were going to sign us checks and things like that to do good work the issue hasn't been that people don't believe that we do good work or that we don't have value to deliver to them. It's just been the devil's in all the nitty-gritty details, and that's been kind of difficult. Sort of transfer of resources in kind and things like that has been much easier. Definitely some of our best non-traditional partners are close by, KCVI, KCI, and I can't say this too many times, you know, agility, scholarship, delivering value to the customer need to coexist, and you need to find a way to make those things synergistic. So what are the goals for the next coming year? Our strategic planning process is underway right now. Our primary goals are, number one, deliver on our current existing partnerships, right, both internal and external. Second thing, focus on current and future additional partnerships. We've been talking with, you know, Tim from Oak Tree, other people from CID and whatever, and there is a lot of opportunity, like I said in the beginning, and a lot of need for bringing in sort of rigorous informatics into the real world. Because with academic rigor comes, you know, confidence and belief and the ability to make information actionable. It's way too easy to say, I don't believe that data, and just dismiss it. And then it's not actionable because you don't have the authority and weight, if you will, of the data behind you. Provide informatics leadership at OHSU, data science initiative. All these things are getting more and more important. And we're providing a certain input into those things. And I think that input has been solicited and welcome, which is really great. Increase involvement with important national big data initiatives. I think we need to look at aligning the university with some of these things more and more, and look at what's appropriate role for the IDL to play in that. Like I was saying before, find new ways to involve industry that, you know, new kinds of arrangements that we haven't tried before. Publish more. Always good. Not good enough all by itself, but definitely more. We've got lots of stuff that we've talked about that we need to get down on paper and get out there so the bigger world knows about. And continue to increase student-faculty engagement with the resources that the IDL is providing and make them aware of these opportunities so they can run with them. And I think that's the last slide. So I've saved about 12 minutes for questions. And if I don't know the answer, I'll point you to someone on my team who does, because most of them are here. And this is not a one-man show. We were talking about this earlier. I'm sort of the tillerman. I don't do all this stuff. I try to lead and direct people, but there's a whole team of people who are doing the bulk of the real hands-on work. And so, you know, I thank them for all their contributions here. And they know who they are sitting here in the front, mostly. Anyway.
I just want to hold down the button on the right in front of you there.
Yeah, you have to hold it while you're talking, unfortunately.
So I just wanted to point out that while we were doing this research and we were looking at cardiology, what happened and when we tried to look at implementing this through EPIC and the validation of the data and what we found out of the differences between what we were doing in chart review and what was being done automatic, was it developed a whole new initiative in EPIC and across internal medicine and family medicine, and not just cardiology, of developing a documentation review and then developing a smart form in which the standardization of this data now goes across these different departments. Cardiology only sees heart failure patients when they're in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
They're mainly managed by family medicine and internal medicine, and then when they get to the tertiary quaternary issues such as heart transplant and VAD, then we start seeing them. So by having these data points available within these departments, it can actually improve patient care and improve their lifelong life without going to the transplant arena if these standards are met. So that's one thing that's happened from this. And then the other thing is how to visualize this in EPIC. And from this came a relationship with CID that we didn't have before. They were clear over there, and we despised them, and we were over here. And now we have that, because of this project, a much better relationship with them, and we actually have an EPIC analyst now on our payroll that actually reports to me which is a whole new way of doing things. So when you get into these projects for us, it stimulated a lot of other innovation in other areas that wouldn't have happened had we not gone down this road, and particularly dealing with how to validate the data and then finding out a lot of it was in text, and instead of a 35% LVF, it was 35 to 40 or 45 to 47, et cetera. It wasn't a strict data point, and then finding out how to get that data. Started these other initiatives and improved our collaboration with Epic and those folks on this team.
Yeah, and I think that really points out how this is sort of an iterative synergistic process, right, where the data gives you, information in order to turn that into knowledge and make decisions. And those decisions might be, have larger ramifications that may, for example, change your clinical workflow and how you collect data, and then you may have to come up with new measures or revise your measures in order to keep consistent with that, and so on and so forth. New opportunities get identified. But the data, I think, and validated analytics of that data is sort of the bedrock on which you can build some of these other initiatives and some of these other actions, because you can show that they're necessary, and you can show what the gap is between what you need and where you are. So thanks for that. Anybody else? Karen.
So I noticed that you put up on one of the slides that FHIR is coming, and FHIR, and I guess I'm curious because we have some internal discussion going on right now for use of our mammography screening decision aid, and we need a platform to go from the iPad application to the EHR, and that's one that I know can do that.
Mm-hmm.
So is that like 6 months? Here?
Well, so one of the, I can't give you a timeline yet. I know that, and maybe Bill can speak to this, because Jim Morrison has taken the lead on bringing this over. One of the things that we need to do with our, this is being streamed, but if anybody from Epic is watching, we want to talk to you about getting next version of your system in the lab to run locally that would implement FHIR. So, I mean, one of the things about the lab and the lab versions of Epic is it's really for prototyping and that kind of thing. No live patient data, no clinical stuff. So you'd be able to prototype it with this when we get it in, and you'd be able to work out what the right way of doing it with Epic's FHIR is. If you want to then push it up to OHSU's real live health system, then you'd have to go talk to ITG, and you can show them the prototype, but that's the halfway we'll walk with you. Anybody else? Go ahead, Bill.
Is the Epic instance populated with simulated data? Or
There's a little bit. It comes from the master train, and there's some, silly patients, Bugs Bunny, Kilgore Trout, that kind of thing made up. Not a lot. It's if there were, but it's easy to add data if somebody wants to enter it. So if you had, for example, a usability study where, you had data, it could be put in. But it doesn't have a significant amount of data in it. It certainly doesn't have like long-term telemetry data or that kind of thing. Although, again, some of that's available. Jeff Gold and Vishnu's ICU cases and stuff could be loaded into it fairly easily if somebody had a use for it. You want to say something, Tim?
Vishnu's data set.
So it just depends on what the purpose is. If the data if fake patient data exists, there's this thing called teleport, or what do they changed the name, but there's a way to teleport in data into the EHR, and we could use that. But if the data doesn't exist, then you'd have to make it up yourself and then import it.
A little bit more about the BioLibrary annotation project and what you guys are doing there, and also kind of as a corollary to that, more generally, is there, the IMO is proprietary, right? So is there any effort to utilize more community-developed standards or help this process help develop community standards in any of those projects?
So we haven't been too much involved in development of standards, although that corresponds with some of the interest in national initiatives that I mentioned, where, I mean, I appreciate your input on what would be really important and, you know, bang for the buck kind of thing. You know, IMO is a proprietary terminology server, but it maps to open standard terminologies. So, you know, I would hope that people that are using it would leverage that more than anything. As far as the biolibrary project, again, this is a pilot project to demonstrate value and also, you know, learn. And so the biolibrary has an annotation schema as it is, and, you know, the initial project is to map to that. But, you know, the text mining group is, you know, schema agnostic. As a matter of fact, we would appreciate, you know, ontological input on and a better schemas to map things to. Now, getting people to use that compared to what they're using now is a different challenge, but we're certainly open to that. One of the problems in doing anything like this is that the extracted values ideally really are mapped to some sort of terminology all the time. It's not just free-form values of this or that, but not every situation has you know, a well-managed terminology to map to. So we're certainly open to that, and you know, would, you know, appreciate you guys talking with us, with our customers, about what direction maybe that should go. But right now it's just a pilot. They have, you know, a big database that has a bunch of drop-down lists, and we're, you know, as a pilot, trying to map the extracted fields to what they've got in their drop-down, so it's, you know, readily import. But there's no reason why it has to stay that way.
Yes. One of the of the things we've done, I think probably the one that's had the less uptake than we thought it might has been the EPIC research instance.
I think so too.
What might we do? It seems like a real fertile ground, especially in this day and age where one by one the old homegrown EHR systems are falling by the wayside, and really the future of research about EHRs is on platforms like EPIC. What might we do to entice students, faculty, others to do more with this?
Yeah, we've been thinking about that. I mean, I think that bringing up, you know, the sexy new technology is one thing. Another thing that we can do, you know, the leading edge EPIC technology, the stuff that's being newly integrated. But another thing I think is you know, steering students more towards, you know, the simulation and data analytics and all that. Now, I mean, it's a different issue, whether the because of the lack of large-scale simulated data, it's a different issue whether EPIC, you know, the EPIC Research Instance is even the appropriate thing for data analytics. But certainly anything that has to do with usability or workflow or you know, data interfaces or, you know, visualization or anything like that has a significant EPIC component. A lot of you know, what we talk about, even when we're talking about with the Knight Cardiovascular Institute, is, you know, what's the future of getting this back into the EHR and making it usable on the clinician's desktop from that point of view. Now that said, there's a lot that is important that you can do with information that doesn't necessarily have to be in EPIC, but certainly one conduit to get the information in front of the caregiver when they're seeing the patient is an important thing. And I think that the more we steer students into doing projects and research in that direction, the more they'll want to use that. The more they'll want to use the research system to do those kind of things. So some of it's, I think, on us to steer our students in those necessary directions that we know have needs. So, last question. We're right at the hour, so thank you for your time and attention.